Good evening, everybody, and welcome. This is the fifth installment, actually, of our Common Ground for 2021, and you are certainly in for a treat tonight. You are in for somebody who is near and dear to my heart, and Jeannie will be able to introduce him in a moment. But I want to say welcome to everybody who's here tonight. My name is Nancy Easterling. I am the Executive Director of Historic Sotterley. And please use, some of you are pros, you're already doing it. But if you're joining us for the first time, please do sign into the chat, introduce yourself, and tell us where you're joining us from tonight. That chat is also where you will be able to put your questions in later for Donald as we get to the evening. The wonderful thing about doing things virtually this year, even though we missed you in person and we are looking forward to getting back in person, is we are going to have people joining us from all over. And I already see people outside of the local area. We have one of our other descendants joining us from Sacramento, California. You're all over the nation. We are thrilled. This is our fourth year for Common Ground. This year is our Common Ground got off to a wonderful start with one of our descendants, and it's going to be continuing tonight with another of our descendants who's had a very long and interesting history with this site. This Common Ground programming in 2021 has been so timely at this time in our nation. We need to understand our past. We need to understand how we got to where we are today. And Donald tonight, as he is sharing his past with us, is going to help us even further make these connections. So what I'm going to do, because you're here to hear him tonight, you're not here to hear me, let me pass the baton over to my wonderful colleague, Ms. Jeannie Pertle, who is our Director of Educational Programming and Partnerships. Jeannie will make introductions of our dear beloved trustee, Donald Barber.
You're muted, Jenny.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for choosing Historic Sotterley. We certainly appreciate it. Well, tonight I want to introduce someone that's near and dear to all our hearts. Donald Barber was born to Ruth and Bernard Barber of Sotterley on March 24th, 1957. He was the sixth of 7 children born to that family. Donald spent his early years at Sotterley and was in the first wave of children to experience integrated public schools in St. Mary's County in 1965. Donald excelled in school and earned a National Merit Scholarship. He attended St. Mary's College of Maryland in 1975. After graduation, Donald chose a career in human services. He met and married his wife, Rosa, with whom he lives in quiet retirement in Hollywood. Donald currently serves as a member of the Historic Sotterley Board of Trustees. So, Donald, you're going to be big now, and I'm going to be little.
Okay.
So we'll get that straightened out. Okay, good. Donald, you're a great storyteller, so I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say today. Would you tell us about yourself today, your career and family, and what you are doing currently?
Okay. My career, I chose to work in human services, so I had a variety of jobs within the human service field. I worked in child protective services at DSS. I worked in family services at DSS, and after that, I worked at in the mental health field. I spent several years at the Shepherd Pratt Hospital in Towson, and after I left there, I went down to Calvert Memorial Hospital. I was working my way back home, and I worked at Calvert Memorial Hospital on the psych unit there for several years. They had an experimental psych unit they were trying out for people that had chronic mental illnesses such as schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, things that were long lasting. And that population has a tendency to periodically go into crisis. So they wanted to set up this short-term unit at the hospital at a floor that was, because back at that time, that was in the mid to early 80s. The hospitals were going through a contraction. They had too many beds, and they were trying to find creative ways to fill those beds. And I think that was the rise of the impact of insurance companies on people's hospitalizations. So it became much more difficult to get a person into the hospital. And the hospitals had excess capacity, so they were shutting down floors. And Calvert Hospital decided to reopen a shutdown floor, which was the 4th floor at the hospital there, and make it a short-term psychiatric unit. So I helped set that unit up. I had been working at, I said earlier, I worked at Shepherd Pratt Hospital in Towson. So I had a lot of experience with things such as structured programming and setting up what they call behavior modification programs, and to help people get back on their feet and kind of, get an equilibrium so they can exist in the community. So I use those skills to help set up programming at the 4th floor at Calvert Hospital. So I did that for several years because the biggest drawback to working in a hospital is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So if you work at a hospital, you can work anytime during that period. And generally, I work from 3 to 11:30, but many times, 11 o'clock or so, things start kicking off in the county because, these rural counties have a very much bar-oriented social life. So people would go out and drink, and if you had any kind of problems controlling yourself, alcohol always whatever problems you have, alcohol makes it worse. So there would always be crises in the evening time. So if your quitting time at the hospital is 11:30, sometimes that's just when things are kicking off. So they would frequently, and the other problem at hospitals at night is there's not a lot of male staff, because what they use to assist with emergent situations are the cleaning staff or the maintenance staff, and they generally go home at night. So there would be very few male staff around the hospital at night. So I was like a general purpose man. I'd be doing everything. Any kind of emergency situation that came up in the ER or in the psych unit, or even on the general unit, if they had to transfer somebody from a general unit to the psychiatric unit, that's where I came in. So that's why the job at social services looked attractive to me, because it was a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday job. So I took that, and like I said, I worked at Child Protective Services, which was a whole nother animal. Usually, people think of Child Protective Services as like child grabbers, like, you go into an emergency situation, take the children out. But the focus was really family preservation and family reunification. So we would never pull children from a home without some kind of plan to get them back into that home. And it just, that's where my inpatient experience came in very handy, because I was used to writing goal-oriented plans for people. So we would just set up a plan for a family and things they had to accomplish to make it safe for the children to live in that environment. And they would either get to stay there, or if they were removed, they would just be temporarily placed and then put back in there. So I did that for many years. And then I switched over into the acute care, and I worked at the clinic right there in Hollywood, the mental health clinic at Pathways. So I retired from that just a few years ago, and since then, because everyone had said, "Well, you're so used to working." Because see, I started working when the summer I was in the 1st grade at Sotterley, and I worked ever since then. So I was more than ready to retire when I got to be retirement age. So I retired and I've just been home. And what I generally do is I watch quite a bit of TV. I read a lot, and I just relax. So,
well deserved.
Very quiet life now. So.
Yeah, well deserved.
But thank you.
And that line of work, you know, all of those, that requires a lot of compassion, a compassionate, caring person. And I know that's the kind of person you are. So I'm sure you touched a lot of lives and helped a lot of people. So thanks for sharing.
I really tried, because it was rewarding work too. Because, you know, if you set up goals for people and they achieve them, they feel good about it too. So, you know, the thing is just to make a family a safe environment for the children. And, you know, I was very fortunate to have a family that was very much child oriented. I mean, they took excellent care of us, and our needs were paramount. So, you know, once you experience that, you want to pass it on.
Okay. So now we're going to go in the Wayback Machine.
Okay.
And we're gonna talk about maybe some times that you actually don't remember yourself, but you have family stories. So your family, there's 3 generations of your family that lived at Sotterley. So what can you tell us some family stories about your grandparents? How did they come here? A little bit about what life was like. And I have some slides that I'll show you some pictures as you speak. So if you'll just give us some of your stories, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. Speaking of my grandparents, my grandfather, I heard from family lore. My grandfather died like 4 years before I was born, so I never met him. But from family stories, I heard that he had come to Sotterley in search of work. And it was actually opposite of what I generally heard from my own experiences, where people from Southern Maryland would head north, or specifically to Washington, D.C., looking for work. And my understanding is that he started out in Prince George's County and came down to St. Mary's in search of work. And he came to Sotterley because he had heard that there was a active farm there. And my grandmother was actually a person that was born and raised on Sotterley. She was part of the Dyson family. So he met her when he came to Sotterley for work. So she had always been there at Sotterley. So they met and married and lived on Sotterley. Now, Sotterley has evolved through the years. So I know you talked about some of the slides that you have, and one of them is a map of the area. And you can see, if you look at the map, it's a pretty good sized piece of land there.
And this is a slide of this is a bill of sale that it's a deed that your grandfather witnessed here. There's his signature, Walter Barber.
Yes.
This is when Herbert Sotterley bought the property from Elizabeth Briscoe Cashner and her husband, J.D. Cashner. And here's Herbert Sotterley's signature. So evidently your grandfather was already here before Herbert Sotterley, the owner from New York that bought the place in 1910. So your grandfather was already here.
Yes.
So I thought this was neat to have his name here. So I thought I'd show it.
Okay. He had probably been there since around the turn of the century. Okay.
And this is your grandfather, correct?
Yes.
And this is the Sotterley girls and a friend here I can't identify, but this is Mabel and Eleanor. This is Mabel Ingalls right here. Mabel Sotterley Ingalls, when she's a little girl. And I think this is Harriet. Is that your grandma?
Yes. Now she passed away in 1922, so she died long before I was born.
And this is at Sotterley, of course. And then this is the Scriber family. Is another family. This is James Scriber. So
Yes, I
they're
actually
another
knew
family.
him.
Okay, tell us about him.
He was a very spry old man, and he lived to be about 106. So he was very long lived. But he was a very interesting character, because if you notice, his hair is completely white, and I know everybody as a nickname called him Snowball, and I think that's why. But he was a very interesting person. He had a very large family. And, there were a lot of stories about him.
And here's the map you were, this is a Capella map for those of you that don't know what this is. It was done in 1926. It was done by Mabel as a gift to her father, Herbert Sotterley. So it looks like a colonial map, but it's really from 1926. So there's some features you can see. This is the manor house, a Sotterley house. And some of the roads have changed. So this would be Tranquility Lane up here now.
Up on
And
the top
this
end
is
of the map.
Sotterley Lane. Yeah, this is Sotterley Lane. And this has Walter's house. So that must be that has to be Walter Barber's house, right?
Yes, because
So
my father used to point to that area and say, that's where I was born, but the house was long gone by that point.
Right. And so up, if you pass, go up here to the intersection, and there's a small road that winds down the field toward the water. And here we have James's house, which they're talking about James Scriber.
Yes.
So if you've ever been to Sotterley, and you look down the hill toward the water, you can see this house, and it was built for the Scriber family by Herbert Sotterley, but I believe you spent some time in this house.
Yes, that's where we lived when I was living in Soliday.
So a lot of memories here. So
yes,
this is where this is the area where you live, the house where you lived, and it's still standing right now.
Yes.
Unfortunately, it's not on Sotterley property right now, but you can still walk to it, and so this is the orientation of where you grew up and you remember. Okay.
Yes.
And can you switch the pictures around, Christy? I can't.
I cannot switch pictures around. You'll have to
okay.
Click through them. Yeah.
Okay. We're just covering up. This is Ernest Knott back here. Let me take my picture off a minute. There you go. So that's Ernest Knott, and this is who is this? Donald.
Oh, that's my grandfather.
Okay.
Driving the ox cart.
Okay, and we can date this picture because one of the gatehouses isn't built yet. This is the north gatehouse.
Yes.
And the south gatehouse it wasn't built until the mid 1920s or so. So that's how we can date that.
Mm-hmm.
So what tell us a little bit about the work your grandfather did.
Well, the thing about Sotterley as it currently stands, it was very different at that time because there were really two entities. There was Sotterley Farm and there was Sotterley Mansion. So my grandfather worked for the farm, as you see with him on the ox cart there. And they said that he was known for his ability to handle the oxen, which was evidently took a certain touch to be able, because they're very stubborn animals. So
right.
There wasn't a lot of mechanized transportation at the time, so they used the things such as that ox cart to transport things.
Mm-hmm. And this is Ernest Knott. So that is Richard. This is Charles Knott's brother, correct?
Brother, yes.
Yes, Charles Knott.
Yes.
Okay.
That's Sotterley Wharf.
Right. Okay. Why is it coming in blue? I don't know. So tell me about. I know you weren't. This has got Herbert and Louisa Sotterley here on the wharf. And I don't know what you're seeing. I'm seeing blue, but so this is when the steamboat still came. So what can you tell me? I know it's not your direct memory, but what can you tell us about when the steamboat stopped coming?
Okay, what I had heard, like I said, this was, all took place long before I got here. But my family, they used to discuss these things, and they talked a lot about the steamboat being like the locus of the economy, because now we're just very accustomed to everything being shipped by truck. And at that time, the steamboat was the primary source of transportation, and it linked various areas. And the other way they were linked was by the train. The train just come right through Hollywood and kind of just ran the length of the county. So the idea was to get things from the riverboat to a point where they would go down Vista Road, and there was a train station. If you go to Vista Road and get to 235 and you cross 235 near just north of Hollywood, there was a train station there, and they could transport goods to there and load them on the train and then transport them to Baltimore or Washington, D.C., but primarily Baltimore at that time. So the economy was really... See, the thing is if you didn't do that and that kind of work, you just got to do farm work, because the economy of St. Mary's County really revolved around tobacco, which is a very labor-intensive crop, and it's not really something that lends itself towards mechanized labor. It needs a lot of hand labor, managing the plants and then cutting the plants and hanging them so they can dry. It was just a lot of labor. So if you didn't do this type of work, then you were in the field cutting tobacco and hanging it. So this is far preferable to that in terms of just the type of work you do and a variety of tasks instead of just doing one thing repeatedly all day.
Okay, so now we're gonna move into your memory here. So let's talk about, if you don't mind, your father also worked at Sotterley. Your parents. Tell us about your family, your mom, your siblings. A little bit about family life, spiritual life.
Okay.
Just to share with us. This is a picture of your father.
That's a picture of my father. Now, the thing about him that was most striking to me was that he was so incredibly strong physically that it wasn't even a factor. Like he didn't have to show how tough he was or how manly he was, because he was tough and he was manly. So he was tough enough that he could be gentle. And he was probably one of the most gentle men I'd ever met in my life. And he had to be the most physically powerful person I had ever met. So he was a fantastic father. And he used to always tell me that he was lucky to have the smartest son in the world, which, blew my head up, but it was just a nice thing to hear. And because he was very poor in schoolwork. He couldn't read very well, and he couldn't do math very well. And then, according to what my mother used to tell me, which my wife says is impossible, was that I started reading just spontaneously at the age of 2, and just started reading on my own because, she had a problem herself reading, and she said, if you want to hear a story, you have to read it to yourself. So she said that I just spontaneously began reading. So it was just nice having parents like that, because they were physically strong people, but they were as supportive as they could be. Like this photograph here, is my mother following my oldest brother at Easter. You see the Easter basket there in the middle of the picture. So they were just very nurturing people, very kind-hearted people, and they were the best parents anybody could ask for.
So what kind of work did your mother do? Tell us about your mom.
My mother worked, they used to call the mansion the big house. So my mother worked at the big house. So she would do a lot of cleaning, a great deal of dusting and vacuuming. And she was just a constant motion. She was constantly in motion. And she would help with some of the cooking. Now, when they had to cook things for Mrs. Ingalls or the guests or whatever, sometimes she would bring in some of my aunts would come and help her with the cooking, but she did a lot of it herself. They would cook for like dinners, and they would have banquets and things. And she would cook for that, but just like day to day, like just regular, breakfast and lunch for Mrs. Ingalls when she was visiting, she would take care of that herself. And like I said, she did a tremendous amount of cleaning because the mansion is very large. And at that time, really it was her by herself, just puttering around there and dusting and keeping things cleared away and straightened up. So it was a busy work. And plus, they had a significant fruit garden and vegetable garden there at Sotterley, and she would can those items and put them up in mason jars and keep in the kitchen there. So my earliest memories are of that kitchen because my mother had like a playpen that she would erect and put me in it, and then I would just lay there because I just remember my earliest memories of laying in that playpen and looking up and seeing the ceiling in the kitchen because there were like a bunch of gourds and cloves of garlic and things hanging from it. So it was always very interesting. So I could just remember like dozing off and waking up and just looking at the ceiling. So I spent all my time in that kitchen, like quite a bit of time out there.
So what were your sisters doing? You had older sisters, so what were they up to? They were in school.
So my older sister Phyllis is the closest one to me, and she graduated in June, and I went into the first grade that September. So there's a gap. Like my mother had her children in two significant batches. There's the older 4 children, and then there's the younger 3 children. And I'm the middle child of the younger 3. So there's not a lot of overlap between the 2 batches of children.
Okay. So tell us about your spiritual life.
Spiritual life, we were raised Catholics, and both my mother and my father were very good Catholics. They attended church every Sunday, and as children, we would attend church, and then we would attend Sunday school after church. And there wasn't any doubt of whether or not you were going to church. You were going, and it wasn't, because you hear nowadays people kind of complain about going to church. But since we were at Sotterley, we never saw anybody. So going to church was great because you got to socialize, and had a good number of cousins that went to the same church. So you see them, and then we go to Sunday school after church. So church was very much a social activity as well as a spiritual activity. So it was very important part of our lives.
Remind people what church?
Oh, it was St. John's Church in Hollywood. So my mother's family lived very close to St. John's Church on St. John's Road. So she always, was involved with St. John's Church. And like I said, my father was always a member of that church too. So.
Okay. So what did you do for fun as a boy?
Oh, that was one of the great things about growing up at Sotterley, because one thing Sotterley has is a bunch of different environments. So there's the fields there, and if you cross the fields, you're at the river. So a lot of water-based things, and because the thing is, my father hated for you to look at TV because he just said he said you sit there staring into that box with your mouth hanging open. So it's just like somebody stole your brain. And, I can imagine. So, I try to think back about that. It kind of makes me chuckle to think about it because he would get so angry. So we would, because you get outside, it's fresh air and such. I go outside and play. So we just go outside and play. And it was fun. I mean, if you look at this picture of Gerard and I here, I was very young in that picture, but you see we're outside. So there's a blanket set up on the grass there, and we're out there playing. It looks like it's kind of cool because we both have our coats and hats on, so it must be a cool time of year. But yeah, so it was very important for him that we go outside and play. And I can remember, when you transition age, I can remember my mother saying, like, get off under me, go outside. So she was in the house, cooking or cleaning or something when you go outside. So what we did for fun was we played outside, and we did it a lot. So.
Okay. So this is a picture of your brother Gerard, and this is you.
Yes. And Gerard is 4 years older than me, so we were always very close. Still close to this day.
Darling kids.
And I don't know, but if you look at the coats we had on, they used to call those car coats, which I don't even know what that means, but that's what they called them. Car coats.
I like the matching. It's cute. You're dressed pretty much alike.
The matching buttons and everything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Very cute. And that's probably outside at Sotterley somewhere on a blanket.
That's the in the front yard at the house down at the bottom of the hill.
Okay. So how about letting us tell us about some of the people you knew at Sotterley other than your family, and people you worked with or people you encountered. Just tell us about some Sotterley folk.
Okay. The great thing about living at Sotterley was there was always a variety of people around. The families that lived in the right across from the mansion and the little office there, they were called docents back at that time. I'm not sure what they would be referred to as now, but they always had live-in docents. And the earliest family I can recall were the Miltons that lived in that house. And Mr. and Mrs. Milton were extremely nice people, and they would always come down to the house and visit us and spend time, because, like I said, the adults in the family would tell you, kids, go play with other kids, just get out from under the adults. But then the families that were around Sotterley, they would just be much more accommodating to children. They would play with you. So the Miltons were great. And after them, it was the Kimmels. They were very nice. The Harmons, they were a great family. So they were always nice families around. And up in what they refer to now as the Knott House, at that time, it was Edward Knott and his family, Karen and Donald, and then his wife, I think her name was Bernadine. They were very nice people too. So everybody there at Sotterley, like I said, there was just a lot of intermingling, and just had a very, because the work was hard. So, you just take the time to be nice to each other. And up at there's a house that used to be up on Tranquility Lane. There was a family that lived there that were called the Ennals. It was John and Mary Ennals, and they had a son named Danny, and we used to play with him. So there was, like I said, there was just a lot of friendly people around. And then if you go and you turn at the Knott House and head down that road down there, there was a few houses down there on the water. There were the Hortons, who were a fantastic family. There were Mrs. Stair, who was a friend of Mrs. Ingalls, and she didn't stay there, but she would visit frequently. And Hortons. And there was another family called the Williams. They were very nice. Hortons, Williams, Stair. And that's it for the families that were down there at the water. And like I said, they were very friendly folks, and they would come and they didn't stay. They would come and visit frequently. And at the large house down there, they call it the Wharf House. A family used to stay down there called the Richies. And I think Mrs. Ritchie was an artist, but they were very friendly folks, and they would invite you down a lot. And frequently they would serve crabs. And there was a cornfield, so they would have a lot of corn. So there was, like I said, it was a very nice environment, and you met a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds who were friendly and willing to share, their experiences and treat you in a fair manner. It was a very nice place to grow, very stimulating mentally and intellectually.
And so tell us what you did for work. You said you started work at first grade. So
yes.
What did you do at Sotterley for work?
Oh, the first job I had at Sotterley was pulling weeds, and they grew asparagus down there in the garden, and they had flowers. So just picking weeds was a good, tedious work for a child to do. Right down there on the ground anyway, so that worked out. And immediately went from that to cutting grass. And Soliday always had very nice lawnmowers because Mrs. Ingalls would always buy Toro mowers. They were very expensive, but they were nice. And they were very reliable and dependable. And we always had the Toros, and Gerard and I would just start pushing because they were push mowers. And we would start pushing in the springtime and go straight through the summer until it was time to go back to school. We'd be out there cutting grass almost every day. And once you mowed the grass, then we had to go back and rake it. And then they also had a broom that connected to the tractor, the little garden tractor, and just tow that around, and that would sweep up the grass. But see, they had a, we called it the Cub Cadet, but it was just a little garden tractor. But I think they thought it was too dangerous for us kids to be fooling with too much, so we didn't do a lot of that. We just did the handwork. Let's see what else. Like I said, just a ton of weeding in the flower gardens there, and and picking lots of strawberries because they had a strawberry patch there. So we would pick the strawberries, and the challenge was to eat less than you picked, because they were very tempting to eat them as you were picking them. So we would pick the strawberries and put them in the little baskets.
So tell us about your education and schooling, and how did your family view education? So tell us about that.
The way my mother and father viewed education was like as the key. They thought education was key because they noticed, okay, I mean, if you see this picture here, if you could shift our picture over to the other side, because you covered up my face, but let's see, this is my third grade class, and this is a substitute teacher because our regular teacher had gotten sick. I think she had to have brain surgery or something. So she was out for a long time. So we had a long-term substitute. And unfortunately, I can't even remember her name. But these kids that I went to school with at Hollywood School, I stayed friends with them for many years. If you look directly in front of me, that's another trustee. That's Jan Briscoe, right in front of me. On the like I said, it's not hard to pick me out because I'm the black person. So these kids, I stayed friends with these children right on through high school. Some of them into college, and it was a basically easy adaptation because prior to going to Hollywood School, this was me in the third grade. In the first and the second grade, I went to Banneker School, and Banneker School was the school in the northern end of the county for black children, and then there was a school in the southern end of the county called Carver. So the black kids in the southern end of the county went to Carver School, and in the northern end you went to Banneker. And Banneker, like I wasn't used to being around a bunch of smaller kids because Banneker went from the first grade to the 12th grade. So I was used to interacting with older children as well. Because see, I'm like I said, I'm the second youngest of my family, so I had a lot of older brothers and sisters. So
how how did your parents encourage your education?
Oh, okay. First of all, both my mother and father both just insisted, like they wouldn't accept anything less than excellence in terms of your school performance. And you had to do your homework. You know, it wasn't come home and goof around. They wanted you in the books. And we would, but see, me, I was always a person that was very active. So I would do my homework on the school bus on the way home from school because I didn't want to have it hanging over me and I wanted to get it done. So, you know, when kids would be kind of berserk on the bus, I would just go into my shell and read my work and do my homework. And just, I typically had my homework done by the time I got home from school. So my mother would say, don't you have any homework? And then I would say, oh, I've already done it. And then she would say, well, pick up the book and learn something new. So you just want you always moving forward. So they placed a high value on education because what Sotterley needed was a lot of manual labor, and they knew that was there, and they thought we could do better. And, you know, because that was always like, I don't want to say a threat, but they say, you want to do your homework? That's all right. There's plenty of work to do at Sotterley. You sit down and do your homework. You know what I mean? So there was always motivation there to focus on your schoolwork. So my father used to make jokes because he was, you know, he was not a good student. So he would say that he only went as far as you could get, like goofing around and copying off other kids. He said that's as far as he made it in school. It's as good as his eyesight was. So he always had a very funny sense of humor. He would make us laugh all the time, constantly, because he had a very rough life, and he wanted us to have a much easier life. And he did everything in his power to make it easier for us. And I really appreciated that. Appreciate it to this day. Yeah.
So, Donald, you lost your father at an early age.
Yes.
Can you describe this experience and what effect it had on your family?
It was devastating because, like I said, my father, in addition to being a primary breadwinner, was just a nice person. And he was a very nurturing, supportive person, you know, because one of the things that I remember is, you know, when you get to be like a young teenager, you're in the stage of your life where you're transitioning and you're developing your own personality, and you know, usually you're starting to have friction with your parents. And like I had lost my father before I got to that stage, so I could just remember being on the school bus or at school, and you know, the other boys would talk about how their father made them sick. It gets on their nerves or whatever, and I just wish I had a father. So it was a very interesting experience. Like I said, the only bad thing about having a supportive parents is if you lose them. So that was it. He was a great guy, and he helped make me what I am today. Like I said, he was such a strong and powerful person that it was easy for him to be gentle. He didn't have anything to prove.
Right. So obviously devastating for you and your family. So one thing that you reminded me of when you were telling this story to me at a different time was, you know, people forget there's no sick leave, there's no vacation. You have to tell us about that.
Okay. Now, see, the thing is, when you work at a rural place like Sotterley was, is that you did your work and you got paid. Now, they also had a limited amount of vacation, because I remember like once a year he had a few days off, and it was always great to have him around the house because he was, like I said, he was a lot of fun to be around. So that was great. But generally, you went to work every day, and if you were sick, you got up and you went to work. Because my mother used to always talk about it didn't matter how you feel, you just had to keep pushing. And then once, you know, because she would say, you know, once you get to work, you start feeling better anyway. So, you know, it wasn't any motivation for a person not to work. If you didn't work, you didn't get paid. So it was simple as that. The math was real easy because there wasn't a lot of margin there anyway. So they weren't making a lot of money. So you had to keep pushing. And I remember when my father died, Mrs. Engel asked my mother how long would it take her to find another place to live. And my father married my mother right from, she was like 19. So she was living at home. So she didn't have any experience with living on her own. She went right from her parents' home to her home with my father. So when he died, she was just, out there. She was starting from scratch again all over. So that house at Soliday called the Gardener's Cottage, that was built after my father died because even though Ms. Ingalls had thrown a scare into my mother by asking how long it would take her to find another place to live, she did go ahead and build a house for the new caretaker of Soliday to live in. And my mother never relaxed, though, because within a few years, she had married my stepfather, and we moved off of Sotterley. So she never felt comfortable living at Soliday after my father passed away because she knew that Ms. Ingalls wanted that house to use for a Soliday employee. So we couldn't.
So I heard I heard your father was a really good cook.
Here's the funny thing. We used to call them Macho Meals because my father was a cook aboard a ship. He when his mother died, he was like 12. So she died in childbirth when he was like 12. So there didn't seem to be any kind of a option for what he was going to do. He just had to go. So he went and somehow got a job on a ship, and he cooked. So the thing that we used to always laugh, because sometimes my mother would be sick, or she would be just because the things would come and she would have to work for days on end, so she wouldn't be around. And my father would make an entire meal with one frying pan. He would take a big cast iron skillet and cook an entire meal, including the biscuits, in that skillet. So he would like make potatoes, a vegetable, meat, and then put a lid on it and put the bread in it, the dough in it, and cook biscuits. So we called them Macho Meals. He was able to carry on when my mother was laid up and not available to work, not available to cook. So he had all those kids, so life went on. You just had to make do.
So Donald, you've been a Soliday trustee for years. Can you tell us how this came about in the first place and what compels you to do this?
It came about, it was a shock. Elizabeth Harmon, who was a former docent of Soliday, and Mike Whitson, who was a former president of the Board of Trustees, approached me and said that they were trying to diversify their the Board of Trustees and make it more reflective of the community. And they asked me if I was interested in becoming a trustee. And I gave it some thought because when I was growing up, we were used to the trustees being like friends of Mrs. Ingalls. They were important, powerful people who had like positions in industry, or they were just powerful people. So I never looked at myself in that light. I was just a humble human service worker. So they explained to me their goal was to make the board more reflective of the community and the various types of population, or just more diversified, more diversity. So I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind that at all. So I met the board members, and they were just all fantastic people. They were very friendly. And John Hanson Briscoe was on the board at that time, and he was one of my instructors when I was in college. And I remember him from that. Plus, just growing up in the neighborhood, I knew him. And, I always thought he was a very friendly, very outgoing, personable type of person. So I was like, yeah, this is a group I wouldn't mind being a part of. And let's see, back then, Jack Candela, he was a board member. He was a manager at the First National Bank of St. Mary's, So, like I said, they were all very, very friendly folks, and they were very welcoming when I came to the board. So I was very happy to be there.
Yeah. So what kind of did you work on any committees? Did you have a?
Because I'd spent a great deal of time around my mother. My mother had, what do they call it? Eidetic memory. So she could remember where everything went in the mansion. So if you picked up a glass and didn't set it back in the exact same spot it was in, she would fuss at you. So it's like, that didn't come from there. It's, you think, like, well, it was kind of close. When the kind of close wasn't good enough. So she was that type of person. So she was, if your goal is preservation, she was the person, because she remembered where everything went, where it was, where it came from, and where it had been. So see, the thing is the interest in preserving things and having it so you could pass it forward as it was, leaving it as you found it, was very important to her. And I picked up on that and felt the same way without having the luxury of her memory.
So Donald, do you have any other memories that we skipped over that you might recall that you want to share?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Well, one of the funny things was what we call getting the mansion ready, because Mrs. Ingalls would contact someone, probably someone like Edward Knott or something, let him know that she was coming down. So, because she would stay in New York, and then she had a place somewhere in the DC area she would stay also. So she would let people know that she was coming, and then you had to get the house ready for her. So they had to build fires and some of the stoves or fireplaces or whatever to heat the place up, because that mansion is one of the coldest places in the world in the wintertime. So they would drain the pipes so the pipes wouldn't freeze, and shut down parts of the mansion when it wasn't being used. So a lot of times she would come and stay in the bedroom over the kitchen, and that was like the more modern part of the mansion. Or other times, she would stay over in the mansion proper. But in the 1960s is when she was turning it over. It was becoming less of a residence and more of a historic site. So there was a transition period, and that's when I lived there on the site, on the grounds when it was in transition. So, like I said, it was a primary function as a residence before that, and then it became a historic site. So it was a very interesting transition. And one of the most vivid memories I have are when they had the parties, because Ms. Ingalls would throw just rollicking parties at the mansion and invite her friends to come. And it was always a very interesting experience, because the parties were completely fueled by alcohol. So even, okay, I can tell you a good example. Okay, Sotterley had a very good strawberry garden, right? So the strawberries were delicious. You always want them. So you say, oh, there's some strawberries. Well, they would be soaking in some kind of alcohol, and it'd be like, ugh, because when you're a kid, that's completely nasty to you. But that was like one of the main things, was to have the alcohol soaked strawberries. So that was a big thing at the parties that they had.
So Donna, what would you tell the folks, the audience out there? Why is historic Soliday important as far as preserving the stories? What do you tell people?
Well, I tell people that the good thing about Sotterley is it was so effectively preserved that it gives you a good window to the past. So you can go there and look around, and you can see history in action. I mean, Sotterley is history. Like my family was there for a few generations, and like I said, my grandmother's family was there. They were the Dysons. They were there probably back to the time of slavery. that I really don't know about, but probably from the time, at least from the time of slavery on. And it's just, like I said, it's just a window to the past, and it's preserved. It's not like it's rebuilt or a reconstruction or simulation. There's nothing simulated about Sotterley. It's real. And it survived all that time. And someone had to have an interest in it for it to survive. And it gives you a sense of permanency. And plus, it helps you kind of put your own life in perspective. You know that the planet was here before you got here, and it'll be here when you're gone. And you want to try to pass things on in as intact a fashion as possible. That's the message of Sotterley. And the recent, I would say, when I say recent, I would say the last 20 years, Sotterley has really worked hard to fill in the story, because it used to be, the story used to be like the big man story. Whoever the big man was at Sotterley, that was the important person, and everybody else was just so insignificant that they weren't even mentioned. And Sotterley has come a long way from that to be much more inclusive in their storytelling. And I think it's really cemented its importance and longevity through that method, because it gives you a direct link to the past. It helps you put your own self in perspective.
Chrissy,
plus, you don't want to. You want to kind of have a sense of how things got to where they are today, and Sotterley is very helpful with that. You can learn a lot from the way things were, and plus, one of the things in terms of terminology, you used to talk about the people at Sotterley who were enslaved. So back in the earlier days, we just said, "Oh, slaves." They were slaves at Sotterley. We didn't say they were enslaved people. We said they were slaves. And the fact that you learn that people did everything they could to preserve their humanity is a huge lesson that Sotterley teaches. And if you go down to the slave cabin and look around there, you see the touches that people did to try to express their humanity and their individuality and preserve it in that kind of environment. It shows you the strength of the human spirit. Okay,
well, we're going to go to some questions if you're willing.
Let's do it.
We have several questions. So this is Jerome Spears. It says, "Hi, Donald. Thanks for doing this. Do you have any stories about Mud Stevens and or the Bankins family at nearby Rosedale Manor?"
Mud Stevens was a very interesting character. He was one of my father's closest friends, and he was. We spent a lot of time at his house. He was. The interesting thing about Mud Stevens was, I would say 90% of what he said was unintelligible. So I'm not sure how he communicated, because take for example, I was one of the smaller children, so he used to call me little tiny wee, but he said his own one word, little tiny wee, and I was like, what the hell is he saying? So, my name is Donald, but he was saying little tiny wee, which is just interesting. But he was a very nice man, and his wife's name was Let. I'm not sure what that was. Let, L-E-T, Let, and
maybe Letty, maybe.
I mean, that's all he ever called her was Let. So, and his children, Bill, Doc, Doris, and James, they were great people. Still friends with them to this day. Now, Bill passed away a few years ago, but he was my age and in my grade in school. So he was a very nice person. And like I said, Doris, the daughter, they were great people, the Stevens.
Thanks. So Lynn Fattrell asked, where did your family sit in church?
Well, okay. My mother and father generally didn't sit together in church, because my mother's sister was a very, I'll use the word assertive person. So the black folks generally sat in the back of the church, at St. John's. But my aunt and her husband would sit as far forward in the church as you could get. They would sit in the front seat sometimes. So my mother would sit with them a lot of times. And then my father would sit near the rear of the church. And yeah, so they had you could tell where they were like little placards on the seats, on the pews in church. And you could tell the black section from the white section. And my aunt and uncle would always sit in the white section, and my father would always sit in the black section in the back.
Wendy Klink asked, did you know Richard and Edward Knott? Edward was my grandfather. Oh,
Edward Knott was a fantastic person. I knew Richard too, but Richard kind of got on my nerves because, to be frank, I think he didn't like the fact that I wouldn't acknowledge his white supremacy. So, because my parents always taught us that education was the key, and you get a good education and you can be and do anything. So I firmly believe that. They believed it, I believed it, and I try to personify it. But Edward was just a good guy. He was just the nicest person you ever want to meet. And I can remember when my father fell out. Okay, because, I was talking about the lack of leave. So one morning when I was probably 13 or so, my mother came and woke me up and told me not to go to school and pretended I was sick. And I was, because that was like, is the world still spinning in the same direction? So then she goes, they called my father Barney. So she goes, Barney's sick and said he's not going to work today. So I want you to stay home and keep an eye on him. So so I pretended to be sick. And then my brother Gerard and little sister Beverly, they went on to school. I'm trying to think if Beverly was in school yet. Did she go to work with my mother? But anyway, so I was home alone with my father, and I said, well, let me go look in on him. So I went downstairs to the bedroom, and I looked in, and he was sitting on the foot of the bed with his arms around his stomach, and he was bent over. So I asked him what was wrong, and he just looked at me and said, I'm not going to make it. So I said, what's the matter? He said, I'm just not going to make it. So I thought, it's kind of weird that I didn't say, because back then you like call 911 or call ambulance or whatever. I said, can you make it to the car? He said, no. So I got his car keys, and I pulled the car between the trees up to as close to the porch as I could get it. And I told him that I had done that, and he asked me to help him out to the car. So I helped him out to the car, and I opened up the back door, and he got in and laid across the seat. So I shut the door, and then I backed the car and turned it around and went driving out of there. And Edward Knott was standing by the gate. So he said, what are you doing driving your father's car? So I pointed to the back seat, and he said, oh, get over. So I got over, Edward got in the car, and then he drove my father to the hospital. And he was admitted, and I'm not sure how Edward got back home. So I think his wife came and got him, but he was just like the family. I mean, there was nobody better than him. He was a great guy. So, what relation did you say you were to him?
That was Edward was her grandfather.
Grandfather. He was a great guy.
So Nancy asked, once you moved to Hollywood Elementary and you were the only African American in your class, did your other grades as you got older become more integrated?
Oh, but here's what happened. When I was in the 3rd grade, the integration was kind of voluntary. So it was voluntary, and it was one way. See, the thing is, if you had formerly gone to a black school, you were given the option of attending a white school. So that was when I was in the 3rd grade. Then I was in the 4th grade. they just changed the rule that said you went to whatever school was closest to your home. So it wasn't so much a voluntary integration as it was, I don't want to say it was a full integration, but you just went to the school that was closest to your home. And the people's neighborhoods weren't as fluid as they are now because, you know, there's certain sections, certain people lived, and that's just the way it was. So the schools were closely related to where you lived. So that's why when I was in the 4th grade, then there was a influx of African-American students at Hollywood School. And they were the same people I went to church with and played with and went to the Banneker with earlier anyway. So it was nothing new to me. It was people I had really missed seeing.
Okay, so there's another question from Karen. What would you like future generations to know about your family's time at Sotterley?
Oh, see, here's the thing. Because I was so young, the main influence on me were my parents, because your parents play a large role in your outlook and really your experiences. So my parents were very, like I said, educated. They weren't educated. They were oriented towards, they were poorly educated, but they were oriented towards education, and they fully understood the value of education, and they emphasized that nonstop. And they were also, you know, just hardworking, honest people. So they were excellent people for historic preservation, because they knew if you changed something, it was changed forever. So it's very important to minimize your impact. You want to step lightly so you don't leave huge footprints.
Jan Briscoe asked, how about the ghosts? That's their question.
Okay. There's always a lot of questions about ghosts at Sotterley. Now, my mother used to spend a tremendous amount of time at Sotterley by herself at night. And I would say, Mama, did you see a ghost or anything that it did or whatever? And she would always say, she would just say, you crazy. And she would say like, her main thing was saying, if you want to be scared of something, you have to be scared of the living. So she said, because the people that are gone don't mean any harm, and they're gone on to bigger and better things. So they're not worried about you. So she had no fear of ghosts. And, did I ever experience any ghosts? And it was an interesting thing. And I think I've told the story before to you all, but Sotterley had hired Mike Humphreys to do some surveying around there archaeologically to try to determine, because there was this old myth that there used to be a tunnel at Sotterley and all these things. And they either wanted to confirm these things or get rid of them. So they hired Mike Humphreys. He did a lot of core samples, and he got some people around there with metal detectors to do some surveys. So they just try to determine what was around there. And at the same time that was going on, I used to go and play basketball on the Vista Road until it got too dark to see, and then I would ride the bicycle home. So I had gone to Vista Road and I was playing basketball, and I come back and I was riding my bicycle, and when I got near the mansion, there used to be the spotlight on the outside of the kitchen. The spotlight came on. So I said, oh, my mother must be up there, because she would be up there all hours of the night because she had to cook and clean. So I rode up to the mansion, and as soon as I got up there, the light went out. I was just like, that's kind of odd. So then I hung around for a minute, and then I went to leave, and then a light came on in another part of the mansion. And when I walked over there, is a part we used to call the library, that light went out and a different light came on. So I just stopped, and I was like, because I was just kind of bemused, like, that's odd. Because the thing is if there was ghosts, why would ghosts be flicking light switches off and on? It makes no sense at all. So then I backed up some. Say it again, please.
I said, I call those unexplained experiences. That's what I call them.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It made no sense. So then a light actually came on in the guest house, which is what you call the spinning cottage now. So a light came on over there, and I walked over towards that. That light went out, and then just lights just started flashing off and on throughout the mansion. And I was just like, that's odd. So I just hopped back on my bike and went on home. And then I came back, and it happened like a few nights in a row, just the lights flashing off and on. And it was, as you say, unexplained phenomenon. But, there was no connection. It was just weird. And like I said, I think to myself, why would a ghost be fooling with light switches? Because they wouldn't even know what it was. I mean, generally, a large part of Soliday history, there wasn't any electricity there anyway, so that made no sense. But it was just very odd, and it did happen. I know from the truth because it happened to me. So that was my only experience with anything unexplainable at Sotterley.
Meredith Taylor asked, how has Sotterley changed since you first joined the board?
Oh, like I said, a lot more emphasis on rounding out the story, making sure that all the history is told as completely as possible. That's the biggest change. And it's a very welcome change. And I think it's a very beneficial change for everyone. That's a good question.
All right, I'm looking for, it says my great aunt Cora Stevens and Leona Nolan, how were they related?
Cora Stevens was my aunt. She was my father's sister.
Okay. Do you recognize Leona Nolan, that name?
Leona Nolan. Let's see. Now, the only person I knew, they called her Miss Oni. Is that Leona?
I don't know. It could be. That sounds close.
She was a very nice lady. It was my mother's good friends. She was very nice.
Let me see if there's any more that I've missed. Janice Walther asked, tell us about your transition from Banneker to Hollywood Elementary. Did being a gifted student cause problems?
In a word, yes. Okay. Transitioning to Hollywood. See, at Banneker, the biggest change I saw, because, people were, talking about the integration of schools and how great it was. To me, it was the exact opposite, because my sister Phyllis had just graduated from Banneker, and she was an excellent student. So I remember when I first started at Banneker, a lot of the teachers from the high school side came over to see me, and they came to see me and see how wonderful it was to teach Phyllis and how bright she was. And my older brothers and sisters, they had all gone to Banneker, and like I said, my parents wouldn't have it any other way. You had to be a good student, or you had to suffer the consequences. So, all my sisters and brothers were very school oriented. So the thing that I remember most about going to Hollywood was losing the support, because I always saw the teacher as a resource. And when I went to Hollywood school, which was the integrated school, then I experienced the teacher as an obstacle and something else I had to cope with. So my teacher, when I was at Banneker, I had Miss Estelle Lee in the first and the second grades. So when I went to third grade at Hollywood school, she had put a note in my permanent record that I was an excellent student from a family of good students. And the teacher that I had at Hollywood school was offended by it for some reason. So she got me up in front of the class, and she was complaining, she was just very angry, because, I wasn't used to angry adults. I mean, I grew up in a supportive environment. So she was saying that that I would be lucky if I could keep up. She said that the teacher's adjective she used to describe me was brilliant, and she told me that all white kids were brilliant. And I was like, okay, I mean, I'm just here to learn something, so just leave me alone. So it was just a very confrontational experience, and kind of I don't want to say tainted, because I just took everything as a challenge. So you want me to prove that I'm a good student? I'll prove it. So that's what I did. I buckled down, and I was cranking out the work as best I could. So it was a hostile experience, but it wasn't going to stop me. You know, it wasn't like I was going to, you know, roll into a ball or go in a fetal position or whatever. I was a fighter. I fight back, and that's what I did. And that situation melted eventually because, you know, eventually she became one of my favorite teachers. But it just started out in a negative manner.
Right.
Which is unfortunate and unnecessary, but that's the way it was. But I mean, if you think about it objectively, there was a lot of expectation for the teachers. Like, you know, these are major currents in American society, and teachers were the ones that had to experience it with little preparation and not enough support. So she was doing the best she could.
So Karen Not Drury says, Donald, your story brings tears to my eyes, remembering all those priceless memories. So Jerome Spears had wanted to know if you and your siblings have been DNA tested.
I did what was it? Ancestry.com, but it didn't really turn into much. I went ahead and entered everything, but I don't think anybody else in my family did it. I did it, but I don't think the rest of them did. That's interesting.
So a lot of good comments, a lot of good feedback. You're an amazing storyteller. So good to hear you tonight. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So you have a fan club there, Donald.
Well, that's good to know. Because my biggest worry was being boring, or like I said, just running out of gas. So it seems like we've taken up the entire time. So I'm very happy.
Yeah.
And I thank you, Jeannie.
Oh, you're welcome. Trust me, you're never boring. Like I say, I can listen to you talk all day. So
well,
I really
unfortunately, I can talk all day. So. Yep.
I love it. I love it. Okay. I'm going to thank you, Donald. I'm going to turn it back over to Nancy.
Okay. Thank you.
Donald, that was wonderful. And I, you know, one of the things about you, even as you are letting us know that things weren't always equal. Things weren't always, you know, you grew up in an extraordinarily segregated world where
Yes.
there were different expectations. But your parents believed so completely in you that you believed in yourself and you
Right.
believed in education. And just hearing how you talked about your teacher, the graciousness with which, you know, was obvious racism on her part, but the way that you graciously would say, you know, she wasn't prepared well to deal with this. Maybe you were part of her lesson, Donald. Maybe you were part of her lesson. I think you taught her that she was wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think you did it by proving yourself to be who you knew you could be, and you proved to her that she was wrong. But I'm so impressed by your honesty and your graciousness. And for all of you who are joining us tonight, this is Donald on the board. And just so you know, Donald served for 6 years. At the time, there were 6-year terms. He rolled off. A year later, he rolls back on for 10 years. He then had to roll back off because it was a mandatory. And now he is back on again. and we are blessed because, Donald, one thing I did want to ask one more question of you, if you wouldn't mind, because you mentioned to me that when you first started at Sotterley, many people who were, I think some of our wonderful friends who are African-American in the community couldn't understand why you were on a board of a plantation. And didn't know if you could comment on that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, because the thing is, you know, the whole concept of a plantation is that there is an overclass and an underclass. And they say, like, you know, you went to college, you know, you had all these opportunities and you get away from there. Why would you go back? Well, the thing is, you know, any environment that you're in, you make the best of. And the thing is that there were, if you take the time, there's a lot of positives at Sotterley that that you can uncover. And I feel that some of the positive people that I met at Sotterley helped make me the person that I am today, and I'm grateful for that. And there was a lot of experience of enrichment. So I feel like a lot of the people that I came in contact with through Sotterley helped enrich my life experiences and make a lot of positives that I experienced, and I really appreciate that. And the thing is, I learned a lot from Sotterley, and I think other people could too. The children could, and the more people that have an opportunity, the better. I think take advantage of that, because the lessons are there for you to learn if you are serene enough to let them soak into you. It's there.
Absolutely, Donald. You were brought on the board as Agnes King Callum, because there needed to be diversity. The other voices needed to be heard, all voices of the community that was here. And I know you and there are several other board members on tonight, Meredith Taylor, Dave Brown, who've all been on the board. So many descendants have joined us tonight, Donald. We have so many descendants from all sides of our stories. Geeta Van Heerden is on tonight. So many people have joined us tonight that have all been part of the story. And this community of very different people coming from different backgrounds is part of Sotterley's story, is part of why, and it's part of this nation's story. And as we are trying to move forward with common ground, understanding the past and the difficulties and the inequities of the past to help us understand our world today and make a better tomorrow. And you are certainly helping us with this on the board. Thank you so much, Donald. We are so grateful to all of you who joined us tonight for Donald's wonderful stories and presentation. We're grateful to the Maryland Heritage Area Authority and the Southern Maryland Heritage Area Consortium for their sponsorship of and support of our Common Ground programming. And for those of you who are members, we thank you. If you would consider becoming a member or monthly donor, help us keep this great work going. Wonderful presentation like Donald's. We want to make sure we can keep these stories going for our community. There will be more Common Ground programming coming up next month. Next month, we're going to have Kent Randell from St. Mary's College of Maryland. For those of you who are interested in genealogy and archival work, he is going to be a great speaker. Donald, thank you so much for being part of Common Ground, as part of our descendants who are leading us and are providing, I think, a model for our nation on how we can all come together and find our common ground. So thank you, Donald, so much.
And I thank you for the opportunity to do this and share my story, because kind of day to day, think about those kind of things. You kind of stay focused on the present and the future and don't think a lot about the past, because you can get lost with that. So I appreciate the opportunity to share this with everyone, and I thank everyone for your attention.
Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening. Good night, and we will be hopefully seeing you soon on one of our other presentations or our live events. Take care. Good night.